You do not notice the gas at first. That is part of the horror. Shell fire, you understand. Rifle cracks, you understand. Even the wet, sucking pull of trench mud on your boots has become familiar enough to file away as another misery in a long catalogue of ordinary suffering. But this begins as something that does not belong to the normal violence of the line. The air changes before your mind catches up. There is a strange hesitation in the wind, a faint sweetness that should not be there. Then something sharper beneath it, something chemical and wrong, like crushed leaves mixed with bleach, pepper, metal, and the bite of a cellar full of damp stone. Then someone starts shouting. The cry tears along the trench in pieces, half swallowed by the walls of clay and timber. Gas, gas, masks on. Men lurch upright from fire steps and dugout mouths with the blind panic of animals flushed from a burrow. A second earlier, one man had been scratching at lice in his collar. Another had been chewing hard biscuits softened with tea gone grey from a dirty tin. Another had been staring into nothing, too tired to speak. Now, all at once, every body around you remembers it can die in a new way. You look out over the parapet and see the cloud dragging itself toward you. It does not race. That is the worst of it. It rolls low and deliberate, thick in some places, thin in others, folding over shell holes and broken wire like something alive enough to choose its path. In the weak light, it has color, but not one stable color. Yellow at the edges, green where the mass thickens, brown where it gathers close to the ground. Beautiful for a fraction of a second. In the same way a deep bruise can look beautiful before the pain reaches you. You hate yourself for noticing that. The first breath burns so quickly you almost doubt it happened. Your throat tightens. Your tongue tastes copper. The inside of your nose prickles as if needles have been pushed into the flesh. Men are already fumbling with masks, cursing, slapping at straps with shaking fingers gone stiff from cold and damp. Someone drops his and stoops for it. Someone else tries to help and only makes both of them slower. A corporal is screaming for order with a voice already cracking into rawness. No one sounds brave. No one sounds noble. They sound like men who have suddenly understood that the air itself can turn traitor. You drag your own protection into place with hands that do not feel entirely yours. The mask smells of rubber, sweat, stale breath, and the old trapped odor of previous alarms, as if panic can soak into fabric and wait there. You suck air through it and the breath comes mean and thin. Better than the open trench, not enough to feel safe. Safe is not a word that belongs here. Through the eyepieces, the world grows warped. The trench narrows into a tunnel of muddy boards, bent duckwalks, jutting elbows, and terrified faces turned insect-like behind their masks. One man is too late. He coughs once, then again, and the second cough comes wetter. He is still standing, still trying to fix the buckle at his cheek, but tears are pouring from his eyes, and mucus runs over his upper lip. He looks offended more than afraid, as if his own body has betrayed him in public. The gas reaches the trench floor and settles. That is when the lesson truly begins. It does not sweep through like a single wave and disappear. It sinks. It lingers. It pools in the low places, crawls into dugouts, presses into corners, and waits where men had once crouched for shelter. The trench that was already foul with latrine stink, old food, moldy sandbags, wet wool, and the sour animal smell of too many men packed too close now acquires a fresh layer of obscenity. The odor forces itself through the mask in ghostly traces. Bitter, sweet, acidic. It claws at the back of your throat and makes your stomach jump. You realize with a dull, cold clarity that this smell will never again be just a smell. It will become a warning, a memory, a punishment. It will live in your brain long after the cloud is gone. Years from now, if you survive yours, Some innocent thing in the civilian world may carry a distant cousin of it. A cleaning chemical, crushed flowers after rain, a match flaring near damp cloth, and your body will return here before your mind can stop it. Around you, the trench has lost whatever was left of human dignity. Men spit into their masks. Men retch. Men pray with frantic lips. Men who yesterday joked over bad tea now claw at one another to get room near the fire step, as if a few inches of height might matter. One soldier fumbles with a photograph he had tucked into his tunic and drops it face down in the mud. He stares at it for one helpless second, then leaves it there because breathing has become more urgent than love. No training lecture, no officer's warning, no printed instruction on gas discipline can prepare you for the intimate obscenity of it. Bullets kill at a distance. Shells kill with noise and force. Gas enters you. It invades the wet, hidden parts. It makes your own lungs feel like contaminated ground. It teaches you that death does not always arrive as impact. Sometimes it arrives as atmosphere, and in that first attack, while the cloud folds itself through the trench and every breath becomes a deliberate act, you understand something that will remain truer than any patriotic speech. The battlefield is no longer just a place where you may be wounded. It is a place where even the air can remember how to hunt you. Before the gas ever arrives, the trench has already taught you that there is no such thing as personal space. You live pressed into other men's existence so completely that your own body begins to feel less like a boundary and more like a public inconvenience. Shoulders knock shoulders in communication trenches slick with mud. Boots slide into footprints still warm from the man ahead of you. Hands grip the same ladders, the same rifle stocks, the same ration tins, the same trench periscopes smeared with dirt and thumb grease. Every object carries a residue of someone else. Skin flakes, sweat, tobacco spit, wet clay. The film left behind by fingers too numb or too exhausted to care. The trench wall leans into you with the cold breath of soaked earth. Sandbags sag overhead, leaking dust and rot. Duckboards buckle under the weight of constant traffic, and where they fail, the mud below is not plain mud at all, but a mash of rainwater. Spilled food, leaked oil, human waste, and whatever else has been ground under by boots for weeks. When you move through it, the muck sucks at your soles with a noise like something feeding. If you stumble and catch yourself on the wall, your palm comes away streaked with slime from timber gone soft with damp and fungus. No one chooses this closeness. It is forced by design, by geography, by artillery, by the simple arithmetic of fitting too many bodies into too little earth. The front line is a cramped machine for keeping men barely alive while asking them to endure more than the body was built to bear. Dugouts promise shelter but deliver a different kind of confinement. You duck into one and find low ceilings, stale air, wet blankets, socks hung to dry and never truly drying. Bodies asleep inches apart with their mouths open, each breath feeding the next man's air. The smell is a packed layer cake of unwashed wool, boot leather, candle smoke, mildew, human breath, and the bitter dusty scent of old earth. You do not so much enter the space as merge with it. That is why gas terrifies the trench soldier in a way civilians can barely imagine. There is nowhere to step away from the danger. No clean room, no private corner, no open field where you can trust the wind to spare you. Every route is shared, every shelter is crowded, every surface is already handled, every low place becomes a trap, even the architecture of survival conspires against you. Trenches are dug for cover, but cover becomes a bowl. Dugouts are built for protection, but protection becomes a chamber where vapor can linger. The very spaces meant to preserve your life are ready, under the wrong conditions, to collect what can destroy it. Daily routine only deepens the risk. You stand watch elbow to elbow with men whose faces you know better than your own reflection. You pass ammunition along the line, each cartridge belt brushing uniforms caked with old grime. You share tools because there are too few to keep separate. One shovel cuts a drainage channel, another clears a collapsed parapet. Then both lie in the same mud until the next emergency. You borrow a knife to slice hard cheese. Someone borrows your mug. Someone else wipes his nose on the back of his hand and then helps hold duckboards into place. Nothing is sanitary. Sanitary is not even a realistic ambition. Functional is the only standard left. Even rest does not free you. Sleep comes in fragments, often sitting up, often with another man's knee pressed against yours, or his boot under your hip, or his snoring trapped inches from your ear. Lice move through seams and collars with the democratic enthusiasm of a tax collector. Rats travel the trench as if they own the lease. One can dash over your blanket, vanish beneath a crate, then reappear chewing at the heel of another man's boot. You curse them, joke about them, throw things at them when you have the energy. But you also understand that they thrive for the same reason misery thrives here. Too many mouths, too little space, too much filth for anything clean to survive long. And still the system demands motion. Food must be carried up, water must be rationed. Messages must pass from dugout to firing step and back again. Wounded men must be dragged through communication trenches no wider than a bad hallway. Sandbags must be stacked. Drains must be cleared. Latrine pits must be found or improvised. Rifles must be checked with fingers already split from cold and chemical residue. You cannot isolate because the trench itself is a collective organism, and every hour of life depends on shared labor. There is a bitter joke buried in all this. Modern war is often imagined as a clash of machines, steel and mathematics, but much of your daily existence feels medieval in the ugliest possible way. You live among damp walls, foul bedding, bad drainage, contaminated clothing, primitive waste disposal, vermin, and close-packed humanity. The difference is that above this ancient misery hangs industrial death, barbed wire, machine guns, heavy artillery, and gas shells make the old squalor newly efficient. So by the time the first cloud comes crawling in, it is not entering a clean military environment. It is entering a world already softened for disaster, a world where coughing is common, eyes are tired, skin is broken, and every object has passed through too many hands. You are not simply a soldier in a trench. You are part of a crowded ecosystem of labor, fear, and contamination, and when the air changes, every inch of that ecosystem becomes hostile at once. You eat because not eating is its own form of surrender. That is the plain arithmetic of trench life. Your body is burning through heat, strength, and nerve faster than rations can properly replace them. So when food arrives, no matter how stale, greasy, or strange it tastes, you force yourself to accept it. Hunger has a way of lowering standards with military efficiency. A biscuit hard enough to chip a tooth becomes welcome. Tinned beef with a rind of pale fat becomes luxury. Tea that tastes faintly of rust and smoke becomes comfort. Yet during a gas war, even the act of feeding yourself begins to feel compromised. As if the battlefield has found a way to contaminate the oldest and most basic human instinct. Breakfast, if it comes on time, is usually already tainted by the environment. Bread arrives wrapped in cloth or stuffed into sacks, but nothing stays protected for long. Flour dust, trench mud, damp air, coal soot, and the grime from handling work themselves into everything. You break off a piece and feel the outer crust go tacky from moisture that never fully leaves the trench. The taste is sourer than it should be. Sometimes it carries the smell of the storehouse where it sat. Sometimes it tastes faintly of the haversack where it rode beside tobacco, boot polish, or dirty socks. If the bread has been cut with a shared knife, you know exactly where that knife has been. Opening ration tins, scraping mud from a boot sole, slicing cheese on a crate lid no one would call clean in civilian life. The water is worse in its own quieter way. You drink because thirst can flatten your thoughts, slow your reactions, and leave your mouth feeling lined with wool. But the water that reaches the line is never as fresh as the word suggests. It travels in containers that are filled, carried, set down, opened, passed around, and emptied under conditions that give cleanliness very little chance. A water can maybe clean when issued and foul by evening. The lid is handled by dirty fingers. The rim touches cracked lips and muddy gloves. Sediment settles in the bottom. Metal leaves its own taste. In warmer weather, the smell can go flat and swampy. In colder weather, it comes down your throat like iron. Tea hides some of that ugliness, which is one reason soldiers cling to it so fiercely. A hot mug in the trench is not merely a drink. It is ceremony, warmth, proof that a scrap of order still survives, yet even tea absorbs the trench. It can taste of smoke from poor fuel, of old tins blackened by repeated use, of the faint, greasy residue left by a mug wiped not with soap but with a sleeve or a handful of grass. If the air has recently carried gas, or if shells have landed nearby, even your comfort is unsettled. You lift the mug and there it is again, not always real, not always present, but feared. A chemical whisper, a suspicion of bitterness. Your senses, once damaged by alarm, no longer report to you honestly. That is one of the cruel psychological effects of gas. It does not stay politely within the minutes of an attack. It invades routine. A meal becomes a test. A drink becomes an argument between memory and survival. You sniff before swallowing. You hesitate before lifting bread to your mouth. You find yourself wondering whether the air above the ration dump drifted wrong, whether the cloth wrapped around the loaf sat in a contaminated dugout, whether the man who handed you the tin had just been coughing inside his mask. Most of these fears do not come with clear answers. The front line offers very few clean certainties. It offers suspicion, improvisation, and the pressure to continue regardless. Sometimes you eat with your mask close at hand, as if it were another utensil. Sometimes you keep it hanging awkwardly around your neck, ready to jerk back into place if the alarm sounds. That alone changes the physical experience of food. You chew quickly. You swallow too soon. You do not savor anything because savoring requires time, and time in a trench meal is never guaranteed. The result is that nourishment becomes hurried, clumsy, anxious. Hunger remains honest. Appetite does not. Shared cups make the intimacy worse. Men pass them because there are not enough to preserve individual ownership in any meaningful sense, and because war strips privacy from the body as effectively as it strips comfort from the land. A cup touches one mouth, then another. Someone wipes the rim with thumb or sleeve in a gesture that pretends at hygiene without achieving it. In another setting, this might seem merely unpleasant. Here it feels ominous. Your lips meet dented metal still warm from another man's breath, and you're reminded again that survival in the trench depends on accepting contamination in manageable doses. The whole system runs on that compromise. Food storage presents its own humiliations. Tins pile beside ammunition. Bread sits near blankets damp with sweat. Cheese and bacon absorb whatever air is around them. Rats get into stores if they can. Flies appear in warmer months with indecent enthusiasm, landing on scraps, mess tins, and jam like little black punctuation marks on the sentence of your misery. Nothing about this arrangement would satisfy a peacetime inspector. The wonder is not that some food is spoiled. The wonder is that any of it reaches you in edible condition at all. Yet you keep eating, because the alternative is collapse. Muscles need salt and fat. Cold nights demand calories. A man too weak to carry ammunition, too faint to stand watch, too dizzy to climb the fire step, is not merely uncomfortable. He's a danger to himself and to those beside him. So you take the biscuit, the bully beef, the tea, the water, the jam, the cheese. You swallow grit. You ignore smells when you can. You distrust your own senses when you cannot. You discover that in modern industrial war, even feeding yourself becomes a tactical act. And this is where the dark irony takes hold. The army trains you to fear enemy fire, to measure distance, to obey orders under shelling, to fix bayonets and clean rifles. But one of the deepest struggles of trench survival is learning how to place a filthy piece of bread in your mouth, while a part of your brain whispers that the battlefield may have followed the food there first. The body asks for fuel. Memory supplies dread. You chew anyway. You learn very quickly that protection in a gas war comes in layers, and most of those layers are thinner than anyone wants to admit. The army issues equipment. Officers repeat procedures. Veterans pass along practical wisdom in tones that suggest certainty. But certainty is a luxury trench soldiers rarely possess. What you actually have is a collection of partial defenses, educated guesses, rumors, and habits built under pressure. Some work well enough to save lives. Some work badly and still get treated like salvation because there is nothing better available in the moment. All of them reveal the same fact. Modern warfare has introduced a poison that men are trying to master with technology still stumbling to keep up. The first gas masks are not the sleek miracle devices later imagination prefers. They can be awkward, claustrophobic, slow to fit, hard to breathe through, and vulnerable to panic. Early forms are little more than pads or hoods soaked in chemicals meant to neutralize what drifts into the cloth. Later versions improve, with eyepieces, straps, and better filters. But even these demand discipline that the body resists under fear. You must fit them quickly. You must keep them sealed. You must trust that the air dragged through their canisters will emerge less murderous than the air outside. This is easier to do on a training ground than in a trench where your fingers are numb. Your face is slick with sweat. The warning comes through shell bursts, and the first sting in your throat is already telling you that you are late. Men improvise when fear outruns equipment. A rag over the mouth, a scarf pulled tight, a sock, a sleeve, a scrap of cloth held over nose and lips. Some cloths are dampened because moisture is thought to help trap the poison. Urine-soaked fabric enters trench lore for the same reason desperate ideas often do. It is practical in the narrowest, ugliest sense. Warm liquid is immediately available, and soldiers are told that ammonia in urine may offer some slight defense against certain gases. Whether it helps enough is another matter. What matters in the moment is that men believe action is better than helplessness, and so they soak the cloth, tie it on, and pray that disgust and survival can coexist for long enough to matter. That is the first myth gas warfare destroys. War is not merely a contest of courage. It is often a contest of procedure. The heroic image of the soldier standing firm under danger gives way to a much less flattering reality. You survive by checking seals, adjusting straps, clearing lenses, avoiding low ground, and remembering drills while your instincts scream at you to rip the choking thing off your face. Bravery does not disappear. It just looks less theatrical. It looks like a man forcing himself to trust a rubber mask while every primitive impulse in his body tells him he is suffocating. Even once the mask is on, your body continues its rebellion. Breathing feels restricted, hot, and mean. Each inhalation carries the stale scent of rubber, trapped moisture, and your own recycled fear. The eyepieces fog. Sweat gathers beneath the edges. The straps bite into your skin. Speech turns thick and stupid. Orders become muffled. Recognition becomes harder. A friend beside you is suddenly a pair of dim eyes behind clouded lenses, his voice reduced to an anxious animal sound. Protection preserves life, but it also degrades the senses and isolates the wearer inside a private little chamber of discomfort. You're saved in part by being made briefly less human. Then there is the other category of protection, the sort not issued in a satchel, but grown out of custom, hope, and the old human urge to make patterns in chaos. Men carry talismans. A coin from home, a prayer card, a scrap of ribbon, a mother's letter folded tight against the chest. Official doctrine may not call these defenses. Yet in practice, they often function as such, because the mind requires some anchor when material protections feel uncertain. You find soldiers muttering prayers as they fit their masks, tracing crosses on muddy tunics, kissing charms with hands that have just tightened a filter. War modernizes killing, but fear remains ancient. The body reaches for rubber and treated cloth. The spirit reaches for ritual. There is dark comedy in this if you are cruel enough to notice it. An empire with factories, rail networks, chemists, steelworks, and bureaucracies powerful enough to move whole armies across continents still leaves individual men crouching in a ditch, adjusting goggles with trembling fingers while hoping a bit of processed charcoal and layered fabric can outwit a cloud. Progress has not abolished superstition. It has simply forced superstition and engineering to share a dugout. Officers and medical personnel try to impose order on the panic through instruction. Do not remove the mask too early. Do not trust your nose. Do not assume the danger has passed because the visible cloud has thinned. Avoid hollows where gas settles. Ventilate dugouts when possible. Watch for delayed symptoms. Treat contaminated clothing with caution. These rules matter, but they also reveal a hard truth. Gas is not a threat that ends neatly. It clings to low places, lingers in sheltered corners, and contaminates not only air, but memory. A trench can look quiet and still contain danger. A uniform can appear ordinary and still carry the battlefield on its fibers. And this is where false confidence becomes deadly. Some men, desperate for relief, lift the mask too soon. Some trust their noses and decide the smell has gone. Some assume that a little coughing is just nerves, that watering eyes are nothing serious, that the worst always happens to someone else. Soldiers are human before they are disciplined. They want fresh air. They want proof that the nightmare is over. They want their faces back. Gas punishes that optimism with ruthless efficiency. So you live inside a strange contradiction. The protections are real but incomplete. The remedies are practical but often degrading. The rules are sensible but hard to follow when terror compresses thought into instinct. You are not choosing between safety and danger. You are choosing between levels of uncertainty. A good mask may save you. A badly fitted one may fail you. A damp rag may help a little or hardly at all. A prayer may steady your hands, which in turn helps you fasten the strap that truly matters. Nothing is simple, and the war offers no clean line between science and desperation. By the end of this education, you understand something more unsettling than the gas itself. Human beings will accept almost any indignity if it arrives wrapped in the promise of survival. You will breathe through rubber that tastes of old fear. You will trust chemicals you do not understand. You will hold foul cloth to your own face because someone swears it may buy another minute. You will call these things protection. And in that word, there will be both hope and humiliation. Death does not charge the trench with a bayonet. It arrives by weather. That is what makes gas different from the other ways war tries to kill you. Shells announce themselves with shriek and impact. Bullets snap and crack, reminding you that something hard and fast is passing close enough to matter. Gas moves with a slower malice. It spreads, settles, and occupies. It turns the familiar environment against you so completely that the line between battlefield and body begins to disappear. Earth, wood, cloth, breath, and skin all become part of the same problem. The first visible sign is often the cloud itself, though not always. Sometimes there is a creeping stain over the ground. Sometimes there is only the altered smell and the sudden urgency in shouted orders. Depending on the agent, the odor may come sweet, sharp, peppery, acrid, or strangely domestic. which is its own obscenity. Chlorine can carry a biting bleach-like edge. Phosgene may seem deceptively mild at first, with hints that do not immediately scream murder. Mustard gas can arrive with notes some men describe in terms that would belong more naturally in a kitchen garden or on a farm than in a killing field. The war does not even grant you the dignity of obviousness. It hides lethal chemistry behind smells the civilian brain was trained to file under ordinary life. The gas follows the ground because the ground is where you are. Trenches, shell holes, dugouts, saps, communication lines, collapsed revetments, timbered recesses, and the low hollows scooped out by artillery all become reservoirs. A man in open country might have wind as an ally. A man in a trench lives inside an architecture designed to collect danger. The lower you crouch, the closer you come to the poison. The deeper the dugout, the more it risks becoming a pocket of concentrated harm. Even the instinct to seek shelter can drive you into the place where the cloud is thickest. You start to understand gas not as a single event, but as a system of invasion. It enters the trench. It presses into blankets and greatcoats. It clings to sandbags dark with moisture. It settles into straw, pooling invisibly where exhausted bodies might later rest. It drifts over mess tins, rifles, shovels, stretchers, and the rough boards used as tables or seats. Clothing becomes suspect. Bedding becomes suspect. Even the dead become suspect, because the things on and around them may still carry traces of what killed them. The men around you respond in ways so raw that rank briefly loses its authority. Officers, sergeants, runners, stretcher bearers, and riflemen all become creatures of lungs and eyes. One man claws at his throat as though he can physically widen the passage. Another coughs so violently his whole torso folds around the act, each spasm sounding wetter than the last. Another tears at his mask in panic because restricted air feels more immediately intolerable than poisoned air. A veteran slams the mask back into place on the younger man's face and holds it there with both hands while the younger one thrashes like a drowning swimmer. This is not ceremony. This is animal management in uniform. Eyes suffer quickly. They burn, stream, blur, and swell. The trench world becomes a place of shadows and warped outlines. Mud walls run together. Men loom, vanish, then reappear as dim shapes behind lenses. Some agents attack the throat first, some the lungs, some the skin, some the eyes with particular spite, but all of them turn the senses unreliable. Tears wash grit across the surface of the eye. Lenses fog. Panic narrows vision further. You cannot trust what you see, and you cannot comfortably trust what you smell, because smell is now both warning and torment. The throat tightens. The chest begins to argue with each breath. With choking agents, the body feels as though it is being convinced to drown on dry land. Air enters, but it does not satisfy. You drag in breath after breath, and the hunger for oxygen only sharpens. Coughing starts as irritation and grows into violence. The body tries to clear what it cannot clear. Men hawk, spit, gag, bend double, and still the pressure inside the chest increases. It is one of the crueler forms of warfare because it recruits your own breathing reflex into the mechanism of suffering. You must inhale to live. But inhalation also deepens the assault. With phosgene, part of the danger lies in its treachery. A man may feel he has escaped the worst, may even recover enough to joke weakly, walk or insist he is fit for duty, only to deteriorate later as damage inside the lungs asserts itself. This delayed collapse adds a special horror to the trench because it makes certainty impossible. You look at the man beside you and do not know whether his calm is recovery or the quiet before a hidden flood. He may sit upright now and drown in his own fluids hours later. Gas teaches you that the body can carry death invisibly for a time before it declares itself. Mustard gas writes its cruelty differently. It may not kill as quickly as chlorine or phosgene in every case, but it punishes exposure with persistence. Skin reddens, blisters, and peels. Moist areas suffer worst: armpits, groin, neck, eyelids. The tender folds and seams where fabric rubs become sites of torment. Eyes inflame viciously. Temporary blindness is not uncommon. The very clothing meant to shield modesty and warmth can trap contamination against the skin. A uniform turns from protection into accomplice. A man who escapes immediate death may still become a wreck of burns, swelling, tears, and pain. Useful to no one, helpless under his own gear. This is where the trench environment multiplies the damage. In clean conditions, some contamination might at least be more easily stripped away. In the line, decontamination is a fantasy stitched together from inadequate water, filthy cloths, rushed instructions, and the chaos of casualties. Where do you wash thoroughly when the nearest water is rationed, muddy or already needed for drinking? What do you change into when your spare clothes are limited, damp, or stored in the same suspect air? How do you handle a contaminated blanket when the night cold can kill its own share of men? Every solution collides with another problem. Casualties reshape the trench within minutes. A wounded man from shell fire is awful enough, but gas casualties affect the emotional atmosphere differently. They cough, choke, stumble, moan, rip at collars, paw at masks, rub streaming eyes, and beg for air in a place where air itself has become untrustworthy. Stretcher bearers move through mud carrying bodies that writhe rather than lie still. Some men can walk but should not. Some cannot see. Some vomit into their masks and nearly suffocate inside the very device meant to preserve them. Some are eerily quiet, which may be worse. Quiet men with grey faces and lips turning wrong have a way of making the trench fall inward on itself. There is also the problem of corpses and near corpses in confined ground. Bodies cannot always be removed immediately. The dead lie in recesses, against trench walls, beneath ground sheets, or half covered by whatever is available. The dying occupies space that the living still need. A narrow firing bay may suddenly contain a man coughing foam, another trying not to step on him, and another still attempting to obey an order shouted from farther down the line. War has always forced the living to navigate around the dead. Gas forces them to navigate around the dying in states of intimate respiratory collapse. Rats do not vanish during this. They continue their business with insulting indifference. They move along trench boards, through torn sandbags, over abandoned kit, around boots whose owners will never again fill them. The battlefield is full of creatures not philosophically troubled by human suffering. Flies, where weather permits, find moisture and weakness. The trench remains a biological place even in chemical war. That is part of the nightmare. Industry does not replace filth. It compounds it. Command decisions become more complicated under gas because the weapon attacks the assumptions behind movement and defense. Hold the trench too long and men are poisoned where they stand. Withdraw too quickly and the enemy may exploit confusion. Keep reserves in dugouts and they may be trapped in the worst concentrations. Move them across open ground and they may expose themselves to fire. A gas attack is not merely a medical emergency. It is a disruption of military logic. Communication fails through masks and coughing. Visibility drops, timing frays. Units lose coherence because each individual body becomes a battlefield of its own. And still, within all this confusion, small acts of competence matter with terrible intimacy. A soldier checks the strap on a friend's mask. A corporal forces men out of a low recess where the vapor is settling. A stretcher bearer keeps moving despite eyes that barely open. A medical orderly, already half choked, wipes lenses, doses morphine when available, and tries to sort those who might recover from those already sliding beyond help. In such moments, heroism looks less like a charge and more like repetitive care performed under contamination. Holding a man upright, making him keep the mask on, guiding a blinded soldier by the sleeve, telling the panicked not to run into the hollow where the gas is thickest. Symptoms write themselves across faces with grotesque efficiency. Coughing produces mucus, then froth. Lips may pale or blue. Breathing becomes fast, then labored, then frighteningly shallow or ragged. Eyes swell. Skin reddens or blisters. Voices fray into hoarse whispers. Cracked pleas or wet silence. The body, so long taken for granted, becomes a series of failing surfaces and passages. Trench warfare already treats men as expendable mass. Gas adds a cruel layer of physical intimacy by making every inch of tissue feel narratively important. Lungs, eyelids, throat, skin folds, tongue, nasal passages. The war is suddenly happening everywhere on and inside you at once. Then comes the uncertainty afterward. Even when the visible cloud has dispersed, fear does not. Men hesitate before lowering masks. They taste ghosts in the air. Some are right to hesitate, some are not. But that distinction offers little comfort. A shell crater may still hold contamination. A dugout may remain dangerous. A greatcoat hung to dry may become an instrument of renewed exposure when dragged over the shoulders. The battlefield develops a chemical memory. Places, objects, and even gestures become suspect. Sit there. Touch that. Wear this. Breathe deeply now. Every ordinary act acquires an invisible question mark. The mind begins storing the attack in sensory fragments, not the grand strategy, not the communiqué, not the patriotic language later printed in newspapers. What stays is the smell that should not belong to war and now does. The sound of coughing that turns from human to almost mechanical. The slick panic inside a mask. The sight of tears running from eyes already hidden behind glass. The way a man bends when his chest can no longer negotiate with the air. The way mud bubbles under boots as soldiers shuffle for higher ground in a trench that offers almost none. It is tempting, from a safe distance, to describe gas as one horror among many on the Western Front. That is true in a general sense and misleading in a human one. Gas does not merely threaten death. It corrupts the basic contract between body and world. Normally you breathe without thinking. You trust the air enough to fill your lungs in sleep. You wear clothes for warmth, shelter, modesty, and status. You take cover in enclosed spaces when danger rises. Gas makes all of those instincts provisional. Breath becomes suspect. Clothing becomes suspect. Shelter becomes suspect. The most routine acts of staying alive are rewritten as gambles. And perhaps that is why the smell never leaves you. Pain fades in memory. Images blur. But smell bypasses argument. It takes hold somewhere older than reason. The first gas attack teaches your body a lesson it never requested and never fully forgets. That the world can turn lethal without changing shape. That a cloud can erase the line between environment and weapon. That a trench packed with men, wood, mud, cloth, vermin, prayer, equipment, and exhaustion can become, in a matter of minutes, not simply a battlefield, but a chamber where the atmosphere itself seems to choose who gets to go on breathing. After a gas attack, fear stops behaving like a passing emotion and settles into you like a second climate. The shelling may ease, the visible cloud may thin. Orders may resume their usual rhythm, yet the mind no longer treats the world as it did before. You begin to suspect the invisible with a devotion that borders on superstition. A strange odor catches in your nose and your body tightens before thought arrives. A damp patch in the trench gives you pause. A dugout entrance looks less like shelter and more like a mouth waiting to close. What changed is not only the air on the day of the attack. What changed is your relationship to ordinary reality. Sleep becomes one of the first casualties. Physical exhaustion still crushes you, but rest is no longer simple surrender. You lie down and listen to other men breathe, too fast, too rough, too wet, too quiet. Each variation invites a fresh little stab of alarm. A cough from the darkness can empty comfort out of a dugout faster than a shouted warning. Someone turns in his blanket and the rubber smell from stored equipment reaches you, and suddenly your chest remembers what it is to panic. The body grows skilled at waking itself. You sleep in fragments, with one part of the mind always guarding the gate between smell and terror. Trust shrinks. This happens quietly, almost politely, which makes it worse. You do not stop needing the men beside you. Need remains absolute. You still depend on them for sentry duty, carrying loads, passing ammunition, sharing tools, and pulling one another out of mud or shell damage. But dependence is not the same as innocence. You watch how quickly a man reaches for his mask. You notice whether he keeps his kit in order. You resent the careless soldier who leaves equipment where it can be damaged, the fool who jokes during alarms, the tired man who says the odor is nothing when your own nerves are already lit. Character begins to reveal itself through gas discipline. A sloppy man is no longer merely irritating. He is dangerous. Family life, insofar as it survives in letters and photographs, also changes tone inside your head. You still unfold the paper from home. You still trace the familiar handwriting. You still look at faces caught forever in peacetime expressions. But gas has a strange way of making tenderness feel both precious and distant. Home belongs to a world where air is an unnoticed blessing. The trench has taught you that breath can become labor and that smell can become memory's executioner. So when you read about gardens, kitchens, laundry, soap, rain on stone, or baking bread, something inside you winces. The civilian world is full of harmless odors. You're no longer entirely sure your body believes in harmlessness. The burden falls hardest, as it so often does in war, on those with the least power to refuse it. Laborers carry supplies through contaminated ground because someone must. Stretcher bearers move toward the worst suffering because the wounded cannot come to them. Medical orderlies handle men whose bodies are streaming, blistering, coughing, half-blind, and in desperate need of calm that the situation rarely provides. Their work is intimate in the ugliest possible way. They hold shoulders, wipe faces, strip clothing from burned skin, tilt cups to damaged mouths, and listen to the changing music of ruined breathing. Gas warfare does not merely create casualties. It creates whole categories of care work that are exhausting, filthy, and emotionally punishing. The poor suffer differently, though not less. A well-connected officer may have better access to information, a better quality dugout, or at least marginally more room to breathe and store equipment. The ordinary laboring soldier lives closer to the collective grime. His uniform may be older, his spare gear may be poorer. His chances of warmth, privacy, and proper rest are thinner. War talks often about shared sacrifice, but the trench remains a hierarchy, even when all are miserable. Some bodies have slightly more buffer than others, and in a gas war, those buffers can matter. Youth does not protect anyone. Very young soldiers discover too soon that courage and terror can occupy the same posture. Older men may possess steadier habits, but their lungs are no more enchanted than anyone else's. Everyone must submit to the same chemical fact. You breathe what is there. That shared vulnerability gives gas its democratic cruelty. It does not care about your village, your education, your jokes, your plans, or the person you hope to become after the war. It meets each man at the level of tissue. Even identity itself begins to erode under the strain. In civilian life, you might think of yourself through profession, family role, local reputation, private preference, religion, ambition, In the trench, especially after gas, you are reduced to simpler categories. Can you keep the mask on? Can you move? Can you help? Can you endure the smell without breaking into panic? Can you still obey when your own body feels untrustworthy? It is a harsh narrowing of the self. The soul does not disappear, but it gets forced through smaller and meaner openings. Some men become quieter. Some become crude and joking, as if vulgarity can bully fear back into its corner. Some grow angry at trivial things because trivial things are safer targets than the truth. Some stare into space with the expression of men who have left part of themselves elsewhere and do not expect its return. Gas leaves fewer grand visible scars on the spirit than shell shock in popular memory. Perhaps, but it can produce its own kind of haunting. A man need not tremble continuously to be altered. Sometimes the change is simply that he now listens to the world as if betrayal might be hiding in the air. And among the forgotten, the ones history praises least, this strain often becomes almost invisible. The soldier assigned grim cleaning tasks, the orderly with blistered hands from handling contaminated gear, the runner who keeps passing through places others avoid, the man too exhausted to complain, the frightened private who follows instructions exactly and will never receive a medal for doing so. The war depends on them, then absorbs them into statistics, replacements, and faded unit diaries. Yet these are the people who carry the emotional cost most quietly. They keep functioning while fear eats at the edges of sleep, appetite, memory, and trust. What gas leaves behind is not just a trail of physical damage. It leaves a social wound inside the trench community. Men remain together, but not untouched. They still share labor, but now under a shadow of suspicion toward air, ground, gear, and one another's judgment. They still breathe side by side, but breathing itself has lost innocence. That is the loneliest part of all. You can be surrounded by comrades, pressed shoulder to shoulder in the earth, and still feel that the deepest struggle is happening in a sealed chamber no one else can fully enter, between your own lungs and the fear that they may fail you next. What the gas changes cannot be measured only in casualties. Numbers matter, of course. Armies count the dead, the blinded, the burned, the men sent coughing to aid posts, the ones returned to duty too soon, the ones who never fully recover their strength. Commanders study effectiveness, weather conditions, dispersal patterns, mask design, discipline and retaliation. Chemists improve formulas. Quartermasters improve distribution. Doctors learn grim new lessons about lungs, skin, eyes, and delayed collapse. Yet none of that fully captures the deeper transformation. Gas warfare alters the moral texture of the battlefield. It takes killing out of the realm of visible impact and pushes it into the atmosphere itself. That matters because human beings are built to trust certain basics. Ground may be unsafe in war, but air should remain neutral. Clothing may wear out, but it should not become a trap soaked with poison. Shelter may be cramped, but it should still mean refuge. Gas destroys those assumptions. It teaches soldiers that safety is no longer a place but a procedure, and even procedures can fail through one bad strap, one gust of wind, one delayed warning, one moment of exhausted hesitation. Survival becomes less a reward for courage than a negotiation among training, timing, equipment, and luck. Luck deserves more respect than military rhetoric likes to give it. Men who do everything right can still suffer terribly. Men who panic, stumble, curse, and survive by inches may live long enough to be called seasoned veterans. One dugout becomes a death pocket, while another a short distance away escapes the worst concentration. One mask seals properly, another leaks. One soldier inhales deeply at the wrong instant. Another turns his head, coughs, and by blind chance avoids the fuller dose. War loves to speak in the language of discipline and heroism. Gas answers in the language of probability. Communities carry the effects long after the cloud is gone. Veterans return home with altered lungs, altered nerves, altered habits of smelling and remembering. Families receive men who may look outwardly whole and yet live with a private readiness to mistrust certain odors forever. Military institutions adapt as well. Protection improves, doctrine changes. Gas drills become part of ordinary training. The very fact that armies begin building routine around chemical attack tells you how thoroughly the impossible became normal. Once poison joins the accepted tools of modern conflict, innocence does not return easily. There is a bitter historical irony in that. Civilization prides itself on refinement, science, and progress. Yet one of the great industrial achievements of the early 20th century is the mass production of suffering that enters through the lungs. The same modern world that can produce better transport, better communications, and better medicine also produces more efficient ways to corrupt breath, burn skin, and blind eyes. In this sense, gas warfare reveals something embarrassing about human ingenuity. We do not merely invent to preserve life. We invent with equal seriousness to deform it. And still, inside that shameful truth, another truth persists. Human beings endure more than seems reasonable. They fit the mask. They guide the blinded. They carry the coughing. They stand watch again. They learn new drills. They write letters home in hands that still shake. They joke badly because speech is one way of proving the spirit has not fully surrendered. Resilience in war is rarely graceful. It is muddy, frightened, irritated, exhausted, and full of compromise. But it is real. That is what this world reveals in the end. Not that systems protected you. They did not. Not fully. Not that courage made you invulnerable. It never could. What kept you alive, if you stayed alive, was a rough alliance between endurance, adaptation, comradeship, and sheer fortune. The body bent. The mind absorbed what it could. Memory stored the rest in places too deep for easy language. And among all those memories, the smell remains the most haunting because it is the least noble. Not a trumpet call, not a flag, not a speech, just a chemical wrongness in the air, returning years later without permission, dragging the trench back into the room for one private second. That is the final insult and the final lesson. In a gas attack, war does not merely wound flesh. It enters the senses and settles there, waiting. What you never forget is not only that death came close, it is that for one terrible stretch of time, even breathing felt like an act of trust the world no longer deserved.